Welcome back, this is Goku's Son DBZ, and the question I have for you today is, does your soul still burn? A tale of souls and swords, eternally retold. Okay, now that that bit is out of the way, this is a sales history of the Soulcalibur franchise, or the Soul series. Last time, my first series doing this was the Tekken series. Now, it's the Soul series. Now, keep in mind, these are physical sales numbers. These are not digital sales included for the newest games. So with that series. And I'm only looking at the fighting games. I'm excluding the hack and slash, like cheap knockoff of Dynasty Warrior game. I'm discrediting from this. So with that said, let's get started. I'll mention the year and the console and how many overall sales there were. So with that said, hope you enjoy the music in the background. I choose Soul Blade, or Soul Edge, known in Japan as the music of choice for this little bit of sales history. First up, the original game, Soul Edge in Japan, in America, Soul Blade, which would introduce, of course, many beloved characters, such as, of course, Sungmina, Sulfitia, Taki, Cervantes de Leon, Siegfried, Valdo. No lay long, of course, in the future we get his son, Maxi. And many others, of course, in the series. And, of course, we would be introduced to a lot of great music, a lot of interesting characters. The first one in the series was released in 1996 on the, of course, original PlayStation. It sold an estimated 1.59 million copies, which was a good start to a new franchise for Bandai. Or rather, I should say Namco at that time, just Namco, not Namco Bandai. So it actually sold almost 600,000 more copies than the original Tekken game. Now, this would be released around the same time frame as, of course, Tekken 2, which would end up doing drastically better sales numbers than the first one, over 4 times as many. But for a debut game of a new fighting franchise and a beloved series now, 1,509,000 is actually a pretty good start. On the PS1, of course, hugely successful. We would see the sequel released, interestingly enough, on the Dreamcast, which, in my opinion, is the best of the Soul series and my #1 favorite 3D fighter of all time. So, maybe a little biased, and personally, I own 2 copies of the original Soul Blade. Japanese import and American version. Released in 1999, of course, on the Sega Dreamcast exclusively. It was in the top 10 best-selling games on the Dreamcast, or actually just barely not in the top 10. Even so, unfortunately, it only sold an estimate around 340,000 copies. Not incredibly huge numbers, though. Most of its sales actually came from America. From sales numbers that I understand, about 50 to 55% of its total sales came from the US. So, yeah, well over 150,000 copies sold here. But with that said, yeah, it is the least selling of the entire franchise as a whole, which sucks, even though it's by far, in my opinion, the best. Next, we have, of course, the best selling of the series. Now, keep in mind, the Soul series has always been more of what would you call it, more of a more loyal following a fan base, much like the Bloody Roar series and a incredible 2-weapon-based fighting game on the original PlayStation, Bushido Blade, which I wish Square would bring back to life. But, yeah, unfortunately, there's only a small group, me and others I know, that are really hardcore fans of the Soul series. It's easily always been one of my top 5 favorite fighting games of all time. Always has been, always will be. But Soulcalibur 2 would be the best selling of the entire franchise. But then again, it also got more than one platform. Soulcalibur 2 would get, of course, released on 3 platforms. It would get released on the original Xbox, the Nintendo GameCube, and, of course, the PS2. Now, of the 3 versions on consoles, many consider the PS2 version to be the inferior of the 3 versions that were released on the console. Each, of course, had their own exclusive character as well, obviously. Now, frame rate wise, the GameCube version was considered the best in frame rate, but if you want quality and stuff overall, that would actually be the original Xbox version. Fun fact, you could, if you had proper attachments and stuff, you could actually play Soulcalibur 2 on the original Xbox in 720p resolution. So, pretty much about high definition level, which is pretty impressive for the original Xbox, to think you could actually play it in 720p. Keep in mind, only a small handful of games on the Xbox, though, were ever made able to play in 720p. But Soulcalibur 2 was one of those games. And of course, of the 3 games, each had their own exclusive character. PlayStation 2 got Big Daddy Tekken, Heihachi Mishima. Xbox got, of course, Spawn, the design of Spawn from a more recent, at that time, Spawn game that was released. And then you have, of course, the GameCube version, which arguably has a lot of people's personal favorite of the guest characters, and that being, of course, Link from the Legend of Zelda series. And surprisingly, and of course, is probably the most overpowered of the 3 characters. Heihachi is probably the most balanced overall, but Spawn is quite powerful too, because the amount of damage he can do. But overall, around, I think Link is the most overpowered of the 3 characters, hands down. But how did sales do? Interestingly enough, the PS2 version sold the least overall copies. When I checked, PS2 version only sold about 500,000 copies overall, which is incredibly small. I was expecting it to do better than that. The GameCube version actually ended up selling over 1 million copies, believe it or not. It sold probably a little over 2 times as many copies as the PS2 version. But here's the interesting fun fact. The Xbox version actually sold the best of all 3 ports. When I was looking up sales, I thought maybe the GameCube version sold the best. But no, the Xbox version sold the best, actually. Total sales of all 3 consoles, Soulcalibur 2 ended up selling around 3.4 million copies. So, 3,400,000. And of that, it sold about 1.7 million copies on the original Xbox. Yeah, that really surprised me. Like, almost half of its sales came from the original Xbox. I mean, I like all 3 consoles. Though I'll be honest, I like Xbox the most of the 3 consoles, but whatever. But with that said, it's still incredibly good, and it was definitely one of the best-selling fighting games on, of course, the GameCube. Sadly, it got overlooked a little more on the PS2 for some reason. But it is still arguably a lot of people's personal favorite Soulcalibur game in the series for many people, especially for Nintendo fans, and that's probably because of Link. And the fact it's actually the only Soul game in the series that ever got released on Nintendo console, fighting-wise. The hack and slash game got released on the Wii. I have no clue why. But next one would be, of course, Soulcalibur 3, and in my opinion, it's probably the best overall package of all the Soul series. I think in the area of game mechanics, gameplay aspects, I think Soulcalibur 3 is the best game in the series overall around, though Soulcalibur 1 is my personal favorite. Soulcalibur 2 is probably my second favorite in the franchise, and is definitely, I feel, overall the best package for your money. And it is seriously superb game. And plus, it would be the game that would introduce the character creation mode, which is a staple to the franchise ever since. And of course, we would be introduced to an interesting boss named Abyss and a very overpowered secret boss called Night Terror. Which I still have PTSD thinking about that freaking boss. But Soulcalibur 3 ended up selling just over 1 million copies. It sold around 1,070,000 copies, so just shy of 1.1 million, which sucks. That did not do better. It still managed to make it to greatest hits because it sold over 1 million copies. I'm glad at least it was a platinum selling game, but it's too bad it didn't sell more than a little over 1 million copies. As I said, the Soul series has just a very small, very dedicated fan base. Me and others I know out there. It's not a huge mainstream franchise. Soulcalibur 2 is the closest it ever made it to mainstream. Next up, oh yeah, and of course it was released in 2005 on the PS2. Next up, released in 2008 on the PS3 and the Xbox 360, would be Soulcalibur 4, which would of course have special characters. On the Xbox version, you would have Yoda, which was a pain to fight against, and then you have the super, somewhat overpowered character, Darth Vader, which I gotta admit is cool, and of course you had Apprentice, as he was called, or rather Starkiller, from of course Force Unleashed. And boy is Starkiller overpowered in the game. Sales-wise, interestingly enough, this is only the second game in the series to actually sell over 2 million copies. This was actually the second best-selling game in the Soul franchise. And that is, it sold 2.1 million, or rather, 2,100,000 copies total for Soulcalibur 4, which surprises me. It's not a bad game. It's not the worst in the series. That's the second after this next game, but yeah, I'm just not the biggest fan of Soulcalibur 4 for the most part. But with that said, still, I understand why people liked it. I think the Star Wars characters had something to do with probably also the sales being over 2 million copies. And strangely enough, there's still people play Soul 4 online to this day, believe it or not. Next up, it released in 2009, 1 year later, got a portable port version on the PSP of course, Soul 4, known as Soulcalibur Broken Destiny. And this version would also have a character Kratos in it. Interesting. The PSP version of the game would end up selling around a little over 500,000 copies, sold about 510,000 copies, estimated to be. Which is not too bad, though. It's not the Tekken Dark Resurrection sale numbers, which are about a little over like 1.5 million in sales. So a little over 500,000. Still, it actually sold better than Soulcalibur 1, which blows my mind. Though, I do feel it's a very weak game. For a handheld, it's actually pretty solid, though. Next up, we have, coming out in 2012, Soulcalibur 5, which is my least favorite in the franchise. Yes, it was cool. You had Assassin's Creed character, an overrated Assassin's Creed character, Enzo, from, of course, Assassin's Creed 2 trilogy. But probably one of the reasons they helped the sales, total estimated numbers, Soulcalibur 5 sold around 1.6 million copies. To be fair, it's not as huge a disaster as other people make it out to be. 1.6 million, not too bad. Of course, it was sold on the 360 and the PS3. And now we come to the last one, Soulcalibur 6. Now, these are just physical sales numbers, but according to stuff that I've checked out, Xbox One, PS4, sales numbers right now estimate physical sales to be about 1.5 million. So a little shy of Soulcalibur 5 numbers, about 100,000 shy, but that's excluding digital sales. Even though I can't get definite verified sales, from what I have been able to find out online is there are estimations that Soulcalibur 6 has probably sold close to 500,000 digital copies of the game. So about a quarter sales it's estimated to be. So if you include the estimated sales of about 500,000 digitals along with physical, that means that Soulcalibur 6 has sold probably around 2 million copies, or maybe a little over, which makes it now only the third game in the series to sell over 2 million copies. It's basically pretty much neck and neck in sales numbers. It's pretty much with Soulcalibur 4 in sales numbers right now. So it's pretty much neck and neck for being the second best selling of the franchise, second only to Soulcalibur 2. But with that said, this was a little trip down memory lane and some sales numbers and a little bit of history to go along with it of the Soul series. Tell me if there's another fine game franchise you'd like me to do in the future like I did with Tekken and with Soulcalibur series. Maybe look into doing one of these sales history type things on maybe the Bloody Roar series. Or like I mentioned, a briefly very underrated, only 2 games though, but still, Bushido Blade or perhaps Battle Arena Toshinden or something else, Soul Dead or Alive. Name it. Dead or, fighting game or maybe another genre of gaming. But anyways, I'll look at the comments below. And I'll see y'all next time. Same YouTube time, same YouTube channel.